Hi, what's up? It's me, Kiran, your favorite booktuber, and today we are here to do my first wrap-up of 2024, and I happened to read 8 books in the month of January. It was not exactly the best month of reading. I read 5 nonfiction books, 2 fiction books, and 1 poetry collection. It was super random, and I wasn't really in the mood to read, even though the month of January felt super long. But whatever, that's in the past now. I'm just gonna talk about these books real quick, and then we're gonna move on with the rest of our lives. I would love to know though how your reading year kicked off. Let me know in the comments and let's just dive right into it. So the first book that I read in 2024 was this nonfiction book called The Real Valkyrie, The Hidden History of Viking Warrior Women. So what this author does is, hold on, let's take it back one second. So what happens is in the real life Viking archaeology world, there happens to be this really big burial ground, which is probably, I think, the biggest Viking warrior burial ground, and for the longest time everyone just assumed it had to have been a man's like burial ground. But then they ran the test, they did the science, and they discovered that actually when you look at the bones of the body, like you do the science and you look at it, it's the body of a woman. And what our author does is that she decides to kind of imagine what this woman's life was like. Every chapter begins with a fictional account of how she must have been raised, the various ways she would have learned like how to fight, and the opportunities awarded to her, and she's pulling her information from the various sagas, from poems, from the later day Christian accounts of Vikings, which obviously are a little bit skewed because those were very like Christian male focused retellings, but she's using all the available resources to her and then doing a little bit of, you know, fiction writing. Then when she does that in the beginning of each chapter, she really deep dives into a particular area of women's lives and the resources and things that were available to them. We have this really long section on weaving, which was not of interest to me. We look at just various figures within the poems that are available to us, and we get a lot of myth and legends, which I thought was really interesting. But I did kind of tune out at certain points in this telling because there were some things like the weaving that was of less interest to me, but I do think it's a really compelling look at women's lives. After that, I switched gears and I read Perfume and Pain by Anna Dorn, which comes out in May, and I got a e-arc. I got a copy from NetGalley, and I would have to say I am so happy I read this book. I think I've read all of Anna Dorn's fiction books. I just have her memoir left that hopefully I should be able to read that this year. And Anna Dorn is an awesome writer. I think she's someone whose work I will continue to read as the years go by. But before we even get there, let me talk to you about what Perfume and Pain is about. So this is the story of a mid-career author who's in her 30s, and she has she did a little faux pas. She has been canceled, lightly canceled, and so she's sort of in self-imposed exile. She's working on her book, but she's really struggling. She has a lot of writer's block, but she also happens to be in a lesbian writing group, and she enters into a little chemical romance with one of the other attendees of this writing group. And at the same time that she's doing that, she's living next to another woman who she finds so annoying and so just like really grating, and she gets on her nerves all the time because this woman will just like barge in and tell her you shouldn't be drinking beer, you shouldn't do this, whatever. So it's just like seeing the various relationships in this character's life unfold, and how she's kind of trying to resurrect her career, but is also, because she's incapable of thinking before talking, she's always kind of messing things up. But what I find so fascinating about Anna Dorn's writing is that she is incredibly funny. She's really funny, but she's also really astute about the times that we live in, and her cultural observations are both scathing and like titillating, and you just want to keep on reading her work. It's her novels are like train wrecks, but you're just so compelled to read them. And I think there might be some people who are like, her characters are awful, I can't stand it, why do they always do the wrong thing, blah blah blah. But for whatever reason, I find her characters to like I identify with them, even though they're so not like me. but for whatever reason, their desire for success and to crave a life for themselves as artists is something that I'm able to grab onto. And I think Anna Doran's ability to mix like Paglia with Roni and film and Kristen Dunst and just all of these various things is so well done. I think she's an author whose career I'm just so excited to see like what she does next. I would definitely recommend this if you're in the mood for like something raunchy, fun, silly, but also like really a good look at our culture and time that we live in. Okay, then shifting gears, I read a poetry collection. I read Hare Soup by Dorothy Malloy. This was Malloy's debut poetry collection, and it's fairly slim, about like 55 pages. I'm not entirely sure how I should be talking about poetry, but I would say that I found the collection to be really compulsive. I read it in one go. I read it in foils. I just sat myself down and read all of it. And the poems, like thematically, I think they were all fairly linked. They're really dark. There's an undercurrent of sexuality running through them. They look at life, death, youth, and there's a slight like tenor of religiosity, and there's also this like element of travel. There would be lines in French. I thought it was really interesting, and I want to check out her larger collection, which I think was published by Faber. Also Hare Soup was, I think, but I might have made that up, I don't know. After that, we move on to my like nonfiction binge. So the first thing that I read was Let's Get Physical, and this is a look at exercise, predominantly in America and England, and how women started to exercise and the various movements that made it possible for them to exercise. And what the author does is she's looking at each decade and kind of seeing the various ways that exercising had to be marketed to women and how it had to shift in response to the previous decades, like promises and image. So we're looking at people like Bonnie Pruden, who really made a big push to get physical education as a big part of elementary school curriculum. And then we're looking at Jane Fonda. We're looking at the woman who brought yoga to the West. We're looking at how the sports bra was created. I think this is a really well done book that looks at the history of things, and you'll see why there is such a predominance of like Pilates and Pure Barre and all these things. And we look at the woman who created it, and we just see the various ways that exercise is something that can make women create bonds with other women. It can make them feel really strong, but it can also be something that can make women feel bad about themselves if it's marketed as something that like you need to use exercise in order to manipulate and change your body. And I think it's just a really interesting look at exercise, because that is something that so many people, do consider a hobby, and you should be exercising to improve the longevity of your life. And I would definitely check it out. I think the first, the part that's very historically focused is of more interest to me. The part where we're looking at contemporary exercise leaders, it kind of fell off the map for me. I think the last hour, I did this on audiobook, was not the strongest, but this definitely was really infused with a lot of history and details and anecdotes. And you learn about so many women whose names we just don't talk about these days, in this day and time. And I thought that was really great to shine a light on these, on the forebearers of exercise. Okay, after that, I read Eyeliner, A Cultural History. And this is, you guessed it, a look at eyeliner and the various ways that women and different cultures utilize eyeliner. I think if you come from a culture that has a really strong connection to eyeliner, this is definitely a book for you that will help you contextualize your own relationship to it and that of the whatever culture you come from. And I think it was just a really heartwarming read, though there gets to a point where you're kind of okay, it feels a little bit the same almost, even though it's not, because she's looking at very different cultures. We have a nomadic tribe in Africa, we have geishas, we have Gothic dancers in the subcontinent, we have cholas. It's really interesting. I do think that the strongest part for me was a chapter on Iran and how for women there, putting on eyeliner actually does become super political. And I mean, it is in some of the other cultures as well. I don't want to undercut them, but the chapter on Iran was the strongest for me because it is there that the decision to wear eyeliner, how thick your line is or isn't, is one where there are life and death, very serious consequences, and I think that one was the most interesting to me. And also what's fascinating is you see that there's like a really big market for eyeliner in Iran, which is very interesting, and there's just so much to parse through on that chapter. There were moments where, like, I don't know, I feel like in the subcontinent it's kind of hard because it is so big and there's so many things happening. Like, I didn't find that chapter on like Gothic dancers was the strongest for me personally. My favorite line from the book, however, was when the author is interviewing a geisha in Japan, and the lady says, "A woman's eyes without eyeliner are lazy," and I wrote that down in my little reading journal, and it made me laugh a lot. I think that's a very funny line. Okay, after that, I read something super random. I was looking for something that was on Libby that was available like this, and what I stumbled across was Ladies in Waiting, Women Who Served Anne Boleyn. And I don't know why I picked this, but I'm really glad that I did, because I had never prior to this really properly understood court life in this capacity, and you know, the various women that are around the queen or the mistress, like whatever it may be, those ladies have jobs, like it's their job. They have a court life, a court career, which is really interesting to think about, because for the longest time I was just under the assumption that these were women of leisure, and you kind of see how that's not really the case. Like, these roles could be really prestigious, they come with a lot of power, but they're also really boring at the same time, and I think really manual too. It was just super interesting. And what you also learn is Anne Boleyn is a character in history who I always thought, like, we're made to think of her as being really, you know, adamant and almost a vixen. She steals the king, she makes him divorce his wife, like we have this rift in the country. But what you learn is that Anne Boleyn was really pious and religious, and she seems like she had really strong morals, and she has a really strong character. You just see how she also then is like super strict with her household, and she doesn't want the younger women to like fight within themselves. She doesn't want them to fall prey to other men. She has really high standards for the women around her, and that was really fascinating. And I think what this book does is that it's really easy when you're learning about history to focus on one singular person. In this case, it would be Anne Boleyn. However, what this author is doing is letting the women around Anne Boleyn have their moment, and you see how the various things that they did at various stages in Anne's life like helped her or hindered her. And I think it's just really fascinating to see. And after reading this book, it kind of led me down a rabbit hole of watching all of these Anne Boleyn videos on YouTube, and I was looking at the house she grew up in and all this stuff. Then the last nonfiction book that I read was Filterworld, How Algorithms Flatten Culture, which is a book about algorithms, tech, social media apps, whatever, etc., and the various ways that they are affecting and changing our culture and the ways that we consume and engage with culture. And the first half of this book is really focused on something that I do think is super important, and that is taste. And on one hand, I obviously care a lot about taste and having personal taste and being able to arbitrate on what you like and dislike. And as the author points out, as other examples and other like thought leaders and philosophers, etc., have pointed out, there is also something very navel-gazing and self-indulgent about focusing on taste too much. You know, it's a luxury to be able to sit there and think about your taste and be able to choose and to spend the time learning about something, and then being able to arbitrate on your likes, dislikes, and then acting on that. But I do think is a really important thing to do. And so that's what kind of the first half of the book focuses on, and I really loved that. Then the second half, we're looking more so at like almost not case studies per se, but we're looking at how cafes all look the same. We're looking at how musicians and artists and businesses have to morph themselves in order to fit within the confines of the algorithm and the constraints this is placing on them. And then we're also looking at how, because of the algorithms that are, you know, ruling our little worlds, the things that we're seeing are actually smaller. It's not as wide of a net and not as widely like accessible to be able to find things that are uniquely tailored to you unless you really actively go out of your way to search. And I think it's a really important read and conversations to be had, because we're all in some capacity like engaging with the algorithms and the social apps and whatever, the internet. And it's kind of like a dark read, depressing read, I guess you could say, because it just feels so like like what can we do, what's available to us. And I think towards the end of the book, the author does talk about how we need the internet to be more decentralized. Right now it isn't. You just have the behemoths, you know, silly Facebook and YouTube and whatever, and it's less possible to like find your own community, to find forums and do that kind of stuff. But there's just so many thoughts in the book. It's honestly something that I kind of think I need to reread, because my reading process of this book was like, I started it, I got a copy from NetGalley. I think I need to mention that, I don't know. NetGalley gave me a copy, and so I started reading it on my Kindle, but I was getting really distracted, so then I switched to audio because it finally landed on Libby. The book is out, so check it out. But I do think I need to reread it. And what I did like about the book, the first half, is that there's so many references to various novels like across the last couple of decades, and one of them that I definitely want to check out is called Things, which is a 1950s novel about two marketers, like a husband and wife duo, who are kind of like keeping up with the Joneses, but they're not very good at it because they'll get the nice things, but they're not using them appropriately. And that was, yeah, that's kind of all I want to say about that book. I definitely think it's like something that I'll be thinking over, and it kind of did go very nicely in the wake of me having read Digital Minimalism in the end of the year. And I just think these are conversations that we're going to be having more and more as time goes on, and we're still so invested in the internet. Okay, then the final book that I read in the month of January was a book that I was eagerly awaiting. It came out on January 30th, and that is the new Sarah J. Maas book, Crescent City #3, which happens to be called House of Flame and Shadow. Now, this book was highly anticipated because book 2 ends with a cliffhanger. There probably will be spoilers here, so just be warned. And in the end of book 2, we have Bryce separated from Hunt, her family, her universe, whatever, and she's in a different universe. She happens to be interacting with the Akatar people. So she's mostly interacting with Nesta and the other Azale, whatever. And so what I really think should have happened in this book is that I think it should have been split into two. The first half, where Bryce is with the Akatar people and Hunt is suffering, I think we should have like spread that out and given it more room to breathe, and to have her really interacting with the Akatar people, because what happens is that she's with them, but it kind of feels like a tease, because then she quickly leaves them. She never trusts them. Like, you think she's gonna try to get them to be her allies, but that doesn't really happen. She kind of makes them mad at her. And then in the second half of the book, there's a lot of scheming and whatever, and the evil that is supposedly like been ruling the planet for X amount of years and so bad, so evil, blah, 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 they fix it like this, solved, everything's sorted. And that just like wrapped up in a neat little bow weirdly, and it just didn't make any sense to me. And I'm really curious to see what's gonna happen in book 4 and 5. I think this is a 5-book series, because I'm like, where are we going? What's happening here? Yeah, I don't know. It was really weird. But I do have to say that I like the minor characters, smaller characters. So Ethan, who's the werewolf, Lydia is an awesome character, and the sprites. Like those characters really kept me invested in the book, because I just didn't love it. I didn't like this book as much, but yeah, I don't know. It was an interesting read, but I guess like when book 4 comes out, I'll probably reread it and maybe I will have a different opinion. But I do have to say, I really wish that this book had been less rushed. Like, I don't know, I just think it could have been split into 2 books and just had more space to breathe and to live. And yeah, that is my reading wrap up. I would love to know what your favorite book in January was, and with that, I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.